Welcome to Innisfil Accelerates, a podcast about the people and technology transforming one Ontario town. Today, we're talking about food. Most of us have been spending a lot more time at the grocery store over the last year. With the pandemic shutting down restaurants and bars and pubs, cooking at home has become much more frequent. And for the grocery industry, business has been booming. Profits are way up, but so are prices at the till. Highly globalized supply chains began to slow during the pandemic, and that, in turn, drove up the cost. Industry experts are predicting the cost of food is going to dramatically increase over the next 12 months. And the reason for that is right there on the labels of the food you're buying every week. Just take a look at where those cherry tomatoes were grown, or where your favorite hot sauce was bottled. In fact, as much as 80% of the food we regularly buy at the grocery store comes from another country. That business model worked for a long time, but now with borders closing, paying attention to where our food is produced has become really important.
The supply chain is bonkers, for the lack of a better word.
That's Marcia Woods. She thinks it's time for change in the grocery industry, and she's built a company that's ready to radically shift the products you buy at the grocery store. FreshSpoke connects local producers with the distribution channels previously only accessible to giant food suppliers. That means more local products in your regular grocery store at prices that can compete.
Well, there's no secret that local food is on the rise, and interest in eating local and supporting local is certainly the narrative that we hear everywhere right now. We started this back in 2016, asking that question as to, why is it so difficult for us to be able to access local food? And we discovered that the primary problem was not lack of interest on the part of, retailers and food service, as well as local food suppliers. They very much wanted to reach each other, but there was this massive delta between the two of them, which is distribution. And, it's a lot easier for us to get a truckload of pallets of food from Ontario to Vancouver than it is for me in little old Barrie, Ontario, to get 2 cases of something to Toronto or to Ottawa. We just didn't have an effective last mile distribution system or delivery system that could accommodate, small to mid-sized local food suppliers' orders getting into retail. So we went after that. We went after that lack of distribution with a shared delivery system that enabled local food suppliers to reach the market by grouping all of those small and mid-sized local food suppliers together. So instead of sending out multiple small little trucks and these suppliers doing it on their own, because that's just not feasible, we bring them all together on one marketplace and in one truck and on one invoice. And then we're able to share that ride and share that resource across those suppliers, which then makes it more feasible. And of course, at the end of it all, it solves the distribution problem when it comes to local food.
So how did we get here? How did we get to the point where it's easier to bring in kiwis from New Zealand and cherry tomatoes from southern Mexico than it is to get something that's 5 or 10 miles up the road? Was it just those economies of scale that the large producers were able to access to bring that food to us? And the little guys just couldn't compete with that? Or just kind of give me a lay of the land of this industry and how we got to where we are right now.
Oh, it's a really complex supply chain system that we have, right? The supply chain is bonkers, for the lack of a better word. There are so many, and COVID and what we've been through with this pandemic has really sort of shown those fractures, of course. So the big piece starts with us, really, as consumers. We fell in love with foods that were easy to get, and we wanted to walk into big supermarkets where we had, instead of just 1 or 2 choices in pickles, that we had, 30 and 40 choices in pickles. So all of a sudden you have everything getting much on much bigger and grander scales. So in order to feed that appetite that consumers had for variety and choice, but also we leaned from clean foods and more natural foods into more processed foods over the past 50 decades too. And now we're swinging back out of that, realizing, this isn't so good for us. So that really fed that appetite, for no pun intended, for this kind of system in which we were heavily processed and on large scales, moving large quantities of foods, as you mentioned, economies of scale into large, big box retail. And so, and again, this is, not pointing any fingers. This is just we as consumers have a big role. We determine what happens in the market. And we made this choice that supermarkets were exciting and filled the niche for us in terms of what we wanted and what we were demanding as consumers. So it really started there. And it really took over in a matter of, 2 to 3 decades of incredible dramatic shift. The other piece is also keep in mind that, in Canada, we have labor laws, we have environmental laws, and we have a northern climate in which, when I want my strawberries, which lots of consumers, we have people who will message us and say, hey, do you have any fresh strawberries? It's because we want not just demand in the seasonal months, but we wanted to eat strawberries and asparagus every week, every month of the year. And so you can't do that when you live in a northern climate. And so all of a sudden, our whole agricultural shift, 80% of what we eat in Ontario comes from outside of our borders right now. And it starts to come from different climates, different countries, different regions of the world. Now, of course, the challenge with that is that, you don't know, do you really understand and know, the environmental impact? There's lots of cases in which, for example, asparagus has had a massive depletion of the water table in Peru, our appetite for asparagus. All of these types of things that end up having a ripple effect in our environment, in our economies, when we all of a sudden start to bring things in on larger quantities from farther and farther away. So there's a lot to think about. And, and I think sometimes the consumers just gets to the point where it's decision fatigue, right? And you care, but you have to, first of all, win the hearts and minds of people and then move them into action. And I think what ended up happening was, 2020 really took we had already kind of won their hearts and minds, right? They were very much interested in local, but what we're complaining about how difficult it is to get it. And then the pandemic came along, and all of a sudden we now have big initiatives and movements to start to source more locally, not just because it addresses serious fractures in the supply chain, but it's also an incredible stimulus to economic recovery and to creating resilience and food security for our future as well.
Yeah, you mentioned that a lot of this has to do with consumer choice and how this system grew up around us because of the wonder of being able to get fresh fruit and vegetables in the middle of a frozen Canadian winter. But the full costs of those products, I don't think were necessarily priced into what we were paying at the till. And now that those kind of seams, as you mentioned, have been revealed because of COVID, the move to try and buy local is really, really strong. But there still are those underlying problems, right, about how to actually get those products to people in an effective manner, in a way that can compete with those big box retailers. So talk to me about that and trying to build the sort of logistical supply chains to be able to meet that demand in a way that doesn't alienate the end consumer.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points that you've made there that are really important. The first one is you alluded to the fact that you cannot just take an existing system and plug local food into it and expect it to work. And we realize that, and that's why our model of supply chain within FreshSpoke is incredibly short, and it's also has very few hops. And that's the key right there to the second part of the problem that you alluded to, which is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is sort of this sense of, what is the real cost? What is the true cost of food? So backing that up a little bit, one of the things that, we know is that the price we pay at the till is not always really what the actual cost to grow that food and to truck it into you. And in a lot of ways, it's an artificial price. So, when you look at broccoli on the shelf in the middle of the dead of winter, and you're saying, oh, this is great, $1.99 for, a bunch of broccoli. The reality is there's no way that you can absolutely equivocally say that broccoli really did cost cost $1.99 to ship. So the first thing we're doing, and I think there's a lot of discussion around this now, is everybody's sort of bracing for the increasing cost of food in 2021. And they're pointing to COVID and supply chain issues as part of the problem. I would say they need to go back at least 3 or 4 decades, because that's really where the problem is. We are fooling ourselves if we think that we can continue to have a supply chain that basically every food goes through an average of 30 hands before it reaches us. That's ridiculous. You can't have a system like that and expect, because every one of those 30 hands also has their other hand out. Rightfully so, right? They need to make money for the service that they provide. So what we've done is said, number one, we can't inflate costs 300%. That's ridiculous. And that's what it would be to keep with an existing system that is, very cumbersome and complicated. What we need to do is lean it out, simple it out, and get the consumer as close to the source of the food as possible, and create as few links in that supply chain, or that value chain, if you will, and make it as lean and mean as possible, and lean into technology. And that's what we've basically done. Is a lot of the heavy work and the heavy lifting that needs to happen to make a system like ours work can be done through elegant applications of tech.
You took the words right out of my mouth. That was going to be the next question about how technology allows us to do this now. Because when you're talking about dozens or even hundreds of small producers and trying to connect those with hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of consumers, there's a lot of logistics there. And back in the old days, pre-information technology, that's a lot of paperwork to have to manage. So talk to me about how you leverage technology to create this system without going into too much detail, but how does that work?
It's essentially using the power of the sharing economy. So basically, we build one platform and we share it across multiple cohorts. And so, the big challenge, of course, is the delivery, because that's where the cost is. So let's say whether it's FreshSpoke for home, or whether it's Sobeys or Whole Foods, because we service all of these accounts too. These individuals are looking for carrots, for example. And they're also looking for, frozen entrees, and they're looking for a variety of other products too. And all these suppliers are everywhere. And then we have all these drivers that are moving around the province, either 40% empty or even all the way to empty. And these particular companies are saying, wow, this is just a waste of my resources. I'd love to be able to put more product into my truck. And that's where we come in. So the easiest way to solve this problem is to be conduit between the supplier and the buyer, and then bring together all of the delivery resources into one platform. So we use a simple, old-fashioned 101 load board. We publish routes of where products need to go from suppliers. We bring all those products into one consolidation point. And then as these buyers are buying these products, as soon as they buy a product, then that goes into the load board for the driver. And so the driver says, hey, wait a minute, Sobeys in London is ordering carrots. I'm going to London next week, and maybe I'm even going to Sobeys with another product. I could pick that product up on my way, and I could take it there, and I could earn some extra cash for doing that. Or the other alternative is, hey, I'm coming to Barrie, and I'm dropping off at, Giant Tiger. I'm dropping off at Sobeys. I'm dropping off here. And then I'm heading back to Toronto with an empty truck. And so they can come to our load board where they register with us as a driver. They come to our load board, and then they have access, and it shows up on their phone, and it shows up on a web browser, and they know what's available to them at all times across the markets that we serve. And then they can just pick off those orders. And then it becomes like Uber. The order goes to their phone, and that phone and technology tracks that order all the way from the consolidation point to the end buyer, and does everything that it needs to do to close that order, grabs a proof of delivery, does the signature capture, finishes the transaction. Everything happens through that technology, and no people need to be involved in that other than those really critical folks, the driver, the supplier, and the retailer at the end of the day. So it's just that simple concept of a sharing economy and being able to build something once and share it across multiple resources that all have the same problem.
I'm interested in your own journey, Marcia. How did you end up being an entrepreneur? What was your background, and how did you end up in this business?
Well, I'll tell you, I never thought in a million years that I'd have a forklift license and I'd own a pair of steel toe boots. Not in a million years. I don't know. I think I was always a really super creative kid. I loved puzzles. I loved solving problems. I loved finding different ways to do things. And so I think it just always was there for me. But, I took the Cash for Life lottery job at community college. I was a professor in marketing, but it never, I was always thinking of better ways to do things. And I love disruptive technology. I love the way as technology has evolved that, you can take something and you can actually create real solutions with technology that change people's behavior and elicit a different kind of response in the marketplace and make things better for people. And I think that for me was sort of what I wanted to do and what gets me out of bed every morning. But, I think there's people that are just have the sort of prerequisites to be an entrepreneur. And then there are other people that like being an entrepreneur, I should say, and like the idea of being an entrepreneur. And this is my third tech startup. So I've seen lots of entrepreneurs come and go. And I would say that that's the fundamental difference. There's lots of people that kind of look and go, yeah, I want to be an entrepreneur. But I'll tell you, it takes an incredibly thick skin and a lot of tenacity to stick it out. And that's the difference between the liking of the idea and really being an entrepreneur is that, you're just going to fight through and just keep, tackling problems and breaking down barriers and addressing friction points, but also listening to the market tell you what it is that you need to do too.
I'm interested that you're in Barrie and this is such a local producer focused company. Did moving to Barrie and being kind of closer to farmers and producers help spark this idea? I'm just interested how that perspective from being outside of a major center like the GTA has kind of changed your thinking and contributed to the development of this business.
Yeah, I was a country girl. I grew up in a farm and in farm country. Many of my cousins and other family members are still, very much farmers. So I think it's just always been in my DNA. It's where I like to be. I'm not much of a city person, but, I moved outside of the city for a bunch of reasons. You're right. I knew that this was my third startup, that I wanted to do something in local food. And I basically put a pin in a map and said, I need to be right in the center of the province, in the heart of the agricultural belt, to really be able to be closer and understand the problem. Because I really needed to listen and understand the problem before we could actually do anything to solve that. So moving north of Toronto and being part of DMZ Innisfil and being part of the Innisfil Barrie business community meant that I could get the resources that I need. I could scoot in and out of the city if I needed to. My lawyers are there. We've got lots of resources still in the city, but it just meant that I could do this business. I, could live affordably and I could have some work-life balance because, for me, being an entrepreneur means that, yes, you have to work hard, but you do need to take time away and reflect and just recharge your batteries. So, I can ski, I can ride my bike, I can, it's just a beautiful community and I love it here. So, and the people and the services, it's just an incredible culture to be a part of.
Well, you mentioned the people, and I'm wondering, trying to attract talent to help you build this business in a more, let's call it rural area, even though, Barrie is a fairly large center. Just talk to me a little bit about that. Like, was it difficult to try and build the team that you needed from that area?
There was a time when it was more difficult than it is now, but I think that I'm not the only one that has or is currently drinking the Kool-Aid on getting out of the 416 area. There's a lot of very, very talented and skilled, whether they're software developers, marketers, et cetera, that have made the same decisions that I have and said, hey, we can go north, we can have great quality of life. And I would much rather, do that and live and work in my own community than spend 5 hours in some cases on the road commuting and really starting to question their quality of life. And then of course the pandemic comes along and changes everything where people can work remotely. And that's driving this whole narrative that much further, faster. So to answer your question, no. Now it's a really diverse, becoming more diverse, more widespread a talent pool in the northern area, and certainly in the outskirts of city than there ever has been before. We still have a long way to go in Canada, but to support STEM and get more kids interested and excited about STEM, and jobs in STEM. But I think that, for us, we've been really lucky. We are so fortunate. We have an incredible team of A players. And I can lay my head on the pillow every night and know that they've worked as hard as I have that day. Which is really unusual when you're an entrepreneur, that you can say that you lead a team of people who are as charged up and motivated as you are to get the job done, for sure.
So you've had some support from the local area. There's the Georgian Angel Network that I know that has helped you in raising money. There's DMZ Innisfil as well that's offered some support and programs. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how important that has been to the development of the business?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I talk to a lot of new entrepreneurs, and I mentor, a lot of young entrepreneurs. And one of the things the first thing I will say to them is, you need to Google wherever the closest accelerator center, wherever the closest resource is going to be for you in terms of an innovation center. And that's the first thing that anybody should do, because this is a journey that you're going to need a lot of advice, and not just like linear advice. You need advice at every strata and stage of your business. And so for me, DMZ Innisfil is amazing because we get top-notch, really super experienced mentors who have been there and done that. And that for me is key. So I'm not sitting across from somebody who's never been an entrepreneur. These folks can say, hey, you know what, when I sold my third company, I did blah, blah, blah. So they can support you at every stage in the business, and you need that because it just helps to expedite things incredibly fast. And that's why they call them accelerators, right? Is it gives you that ability to get things done faster. The other piece is it brings together like-minded people. So other companies, even through COVID, the opportunity to get on a call and see, 12, 24 other faces of people that are doing the same things you're doing is, and hearing their stories and getting their suggestions makes a huge difference. It's what keeps us all moving forward, because being an entrepreneur is incredibly lonely. Unless you've been here, you really don't know how incredibly lonely it is. You're at a cocktail party and everybody's talking, and all you're doing is thinking about your business, right? Or wanting to talk about your business. So it does really help to have that, circle and sphere of mentors, but also other like-minded companies around you. And then the other piece of this is, we're really fortunate in this area to have a really organized, amazing angel network in the Georgian Angel Network. I have pitched 3 different angel networks across Ontario, all very, very well-respected angel networks. And Georgian angels are right up there with them. They're very organized. They're very sophisticated. They're very now experienced in angel investing. And so to have them in our corner and be willing to take the lead on our round in 2019 was remarkable. And we closed that round inside 30 days, oversubscribed, by the way. And that really I can attribute to the fact that, I basically got up and pitched the Georgian Angel Network and said, I want you guys to lead this round. And that's really, usually angels follow, right? They don't lead. But in this case, they said, yeah, we'll do it. And they provided us with that support. And that 30-day period was intense, but we got it done. And we just hit the gas pedal as soon as that round closed.
Well, you mentioned that we're in this perfect time for this business idea. As not only was there more of a demand for local products, a greater understanding of the costs of the old way of buying food, but now you add COVID on top of that, and all that becomes all the more pressing. That said, what do you see as like the biggest stumbling blocks to you and your growth over the next 12 months, 5 years looking out? Like, what are the biggest hurdles you think you're going to have to clear if you're going to be able to scale this business up? I
think the challenge we're going to have is always going to be the growing pains of scale, right? So we're at the first initial stage of any company, which is really proving it. We've proved it out. So we're just coming to the tail end of, proving out our model and getting to the point where we're ready for that next stage, which is growth and then scale. And, that scaling piece comes with, some significant growing pains when you start to look at where to go, when to go there. So I think the big challenge we're going to have is, we know this works here, and the big hurdle is going to be we need to make sure, and I guess it's not really as much of a challenge as just maybe an unknown, is, we need to make sure that whatever model we develop here is in fact fully scalable. So we can't go early. We have to make sure that we're fully automated, that we have a system that works end to end and that can be replicated in other communities. And then the big unknown for us right now is, where do we go first? And, because we have to make sure that we don't have a chicken and egg problem. We have to solve that chicken and egg problem of, do we need suppliers before we have buyers, or buyers before we have suppliers? And where do the drivers fit into all of that? So it's just those unknowns that are out there that we have to solve in the next few months to really lay out our roadmap forward, so that we can present a really clear vision of where we're going in the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, to get other investors and other people interested and in our corner, so that we can continue to scale this. And because we don't want to go slow, we want to go fast, and we have to make sure that we're really doing this in a very calculated style.
When you allow yourself a few moments to really kind of dream about the possibilities of this business, I know you're probably so caught up all the time seeing all the problems in front of you, but when you think about where this thing could really go, do you envision it scaling up to encompass most parts of Canada, most parts of North America, Europe? What do you think? Like, what's your biggest dream for this thing?
There's no question about it. I intend on taking a third of the local food market in North America. That's my goal. I think we can take a third. And I think we should. We have something that is absolutely innovative and scalable, and the technology is solid. So our ability to be able to take that market, and I'd like to, when I close my eyes, and I do this because you gotta, right? As an entrepreneur, you've got to have your eye on the prize. And so for us, being in all the major markets, and major and mid-sized markets across North America in the next 5 years would be absolutely where we need to be, for sure.
I think I'll leave it there, Marcia. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the audience before we let you go?
Well, I think, I think this is a really interesting time that we live in terms of consumers' adoption of technology and using online tools and resources during this time when, we can't get out and sort of use conventional means to get our groceries. And I think the market is right in their prediction that these are patterns that will continue to stay with us long after the pandemic has passed. And I think, I would just say that one of the most important things we can all do right now is not just say we're going to support local, but really get out there, because for every dollar we spend, not just in local food, but in local goods, 45 cents of that dollar stays in our local community. Whereas if I buy something that's offshored or outside of the country and province, only 1.8 cents of that dollar stays and builds my community. So, whenever we get into debates about economic development and what's sort of wrong with the world, I always say to people, if you like your roads and you like your schools and you don't want to pay higher taxes, support local, because that is your economic base. That is where you can have a direct impact on economic recovery and resilience if we all just dig a little deeper and actually put our money where our mouths are and support local food and other local products as well.
That's a great place to end it, Marcia. Thank you for making time for me.
Great to talk to you. All the best.
You can learn more about Marcia Woods and FreshSpoke by clicking the link in the episode description. Innisfil Accelerates is a program sponsored by the town of Innisfil. You can learn more about how they can help support your great business idea at innisfilaccelerates.ca.